Hello guys, today I'll be walking you through another setup that I caught. It was a nice bullish trade on CadJpy. So in the last few weeks, I've had a very nice winning streak. I think I've won my last 4 trades in a row actually. So far that should be the highest winning streak for the year. In the last video, I showed you how I was able to make about $4,000 and recover from drawdown at the same time. I processed one payout, I think, last week after the drawdown recovery. So on CJ for the last, I think, 1 month or something, we've had about 3 TPs. This is the first TP on 8th of May. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, I had a second TP here on 28th of May, which I broke down in my recent YouTube video. Then early this week on Monday, I had another TP on CJ again. So I've had 3 back-to-back winners on CJ. Then the fourth trade, which makes it 4 winners in a row, was from UJ. I think that should be sometime towards the end of last month, 28th if I'm not wrong. Here it is. We had a winner on UJ. Also covered it in the recent market breakdown video. So today I'll be focusing to show you this setup on CJ, which assisted me to make about 1,800, almost 1,900 profits, about 2.7% up on my FundedNext account. Can confirm the same thing. We do have the account number. Check from my FundedNext dashboard. Here's the same account number. And if you go, you can see the balance. If I take you to the history and we focus on the last month, which is basically the period where I've had this back-to-back winners, you can see how it looks like. So that CJ setup is here, close with about 1939. However, it was an overnight trade. It took longer than usual, so it had a swap fee. So I've just gone to the trading overview of this account so that you can see those details. Here is the commission for the trade, which deducted about $20, and here's the swap fee because the trade went overnight. Probably it's the longest trade I've had this year, if I'm not wrong. So the swap was quite high, an extra $72. So if you add up this, the trade should have closed at about 1940 USD, but you ended up making only 1847, which is still not that bad. The moment I'll just be waiting for my trading cycle to end, then I should be requesting the payout of these profits maybe in the next 1 week or something. So be sure to check out FundedNext if you want to get a challenge with them. The links are in the video description. I do have a 110% refund code if you use my link. Simply means when you pass your challenge and get to your first payout, you'll get an extra 10% of the refund on the challenge fees. Now that being said, let's head into the trade breakdown. This is on Monday, 9th of June. Start by heading to the daily time frame. I was looking for my setup on this day, which is here. So on my previous video, when I was doing the breakdown of this CJ, I had marked a couple of support levels. So I was still trading this market with the same bias that from a price action point of view, this market had done low here, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. Then eventually we had this structure shift whereby the market closed above the previous high. So from that point, I was keen to try to anticipate some short-term buys in this market. Then we saw sellers coming in here with some long bearish momentum candles. But interestingly, as the market approached this level of support, which was marked, we saw the selling pressure getting exhausted. Then we do have this long bullish candle, which was formed. After the long bullish candle, I actually had a TP the following day, which is on 28th of May. The breakdown of the trade is on my channel, I think 2 videos backwards. Then you fast forward a couple of days later, you will see that this market came back, retested this same level, then it bounced back upwards. So at this point in time, I'm still confident that I can try to squeeze in and get some buy opportunities in this market. And the first thing I want to focus on is making sure I get a daily bias, which is in line with the direction that I want the market to trade to. So for that to happen, the previous day usually has to close bullish. If you refer to the previous setup, you'd notice which was on this day before I took that buy setup, the previous day had to be a bullish candle first. Same criteria, nothing changes. Previous day had to be bullish, which is on Friday, the 6th of June. Then we skip the weekend. So when we start Monday, this is the candle that I'm focusing on. And I'll be looking for this market to probably do a pullback into this previous day bullish candle, and hopefully it can continue going upwards. As usual, whether the market will buy in the long run or the short run is none of our business. The only thing I'm focused on is to get my 1:3 risk reward setup. So I only need 45 pips on this day in that market. And I also need to use a stop loss of 15 pips. So for me to do that effectively, I have to narrow down to the lower time frame to make sure I'm taking my trade at a precise level. So we come on the M15 on that day, which is the 9th of June. Also want to just confirm the calendar is clean. Here is it, 9th of June, there was no high impact news. which is something that I like. Anytime there are no fundamentals, in my own opinion, it's easy for you to get a short-term setup that can respect your price action without having the fear of the setup having some manipulation based on how the fundamental data will be released. So a clean calendar for me is a very good sign to be in the markets. Next thing, when I start my day on Monday, I only focus to execute setups from 6 a.m. my time. So that's why I've placed this vertical line here at 6 a.m. Now by 6 a.m. when I wake up, there are a couple of things I'm looking at. The first one is if the market had done a significant impulse, I would not want to take any setup until we get a retracement. Now, if you check by this 6 a.m., the market had already done some significant pullback. If I can measure the number of pips, that's about literally 50 pips. So for me, a 50 pip retracement, that is quite significant enough. Meaning from this point in time, if I get any confirmation, I would consider it a setup that is good enough. Assuming I wake up in the morning and this market is still buying and you've not done a pullback, I will not take any trade until sometime during the day when it does a significant pullback, if it actually does. Because there are days where you wait and the market never does a pullback. The whole idea of waiting for a pullback is once the market has been buying for a long time, there is some exhaustion in that buying momentum. And when you study price action, because price action is basically just studying the patterns of the market and trying to capitalize on what we've seen happening over and over. And the price has proven for years that after a significant impulse, we will have some pullback. So you don't want just to be buying anywhere, especially if the market has been buying for a long period. You might be right on the direction, but still lose money. So now that we have our pullback by 6 a.m. of over 50 pips, it means I can now start to anticipate my setups. First thing I'm looking for is a W pattern when I wake up. And by 6 a.m., I'll just mark and show you that we had a W here. It required you to zoom in the candles a little bit for you to see it clearly. So I'll have to delete this so that you can see the W. The W starts from this candle. We had 2 selling candles. We had 2 buying candles, 1 selling candle, and 2 buying candles which closed above this center point. If you take this and drag it to the right, then you minimize based on how I identify patterns, this is valid. What matters is the ending point is slightly above the middle point. My theory is simple, price should come back to the center point. That's where we take the setup. Now for this pattern close at exactly 6:30 a.m., the next candle, which was this bearish candle, clearly traded downwards to the center point. So that was a good time for me to anticipate a setup. However, I do have one more confirmation. Before I take this trade, I want to check the previous 1 hour candle, because the 1 hour candle is slightly a higher time frame. And you know higher time frames give us more confidence as compared to lower time frames. On the lower time frames, you can get so many fake outs which mean nothing. But when we see a candle on the higher time frame, it will have more significance. So the retest is happening at 6:45. Now we want to look at the candle between 5 to 6 a.m., which is the previous 1 hour. So we go back to Monday, 9th of June. The candle between 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. is what I'm interested in. If you zoom in, without a doubt, you can see 5 to 6 a.m. was very bearish. So that means as much as I've got most of the things in line, this one confluence has still not played according to my trading playbook. I'd have taken the setup if the previous candle of the 1 hour 5 to 6 was bullish. So going back to our market, let me return the 6 a.m. mark. This pattern was invalidated, looks nice, but then didn't meet the full criteria for execution. So I go about my day continuing looking for the same thing. And interestingly enough, this market didn't form any other pattern until somewhere on this low area. So we did have this selling candle. We had 2 bullish candles, 1 selling candles, and we want a couple of bullish candles that can close above this center point, which we have it by this point in time. So now if I'm to take this, again, what matters is the ending point is above this center point. Drag that to the right and you will see that this was now a valid W pattern. So we look for the same criteria. The retest should happen at this center point, and I use it as a range sometimes. So this next candle retested this point at 1:45 p.m. So by 1:45, you want to look at the candle between 12 to 1. Is it bullish or not? 12 to 1 candle is here. Again, it's bearish, so we can't take that trade. So the retest at this point was invalid. However, if you check carefully, the next candle, before it went up, it came back to retest this same price range. So when this candle came back to retest, this was now 2 p.m. So at 2 p.m., another 1 hour candle is forming. So is it possible that the previous 1 hour is now bullish? That's what you want to confirm. So the previous 1 hour is the candle now between 1 to 2 p.m. So same thing back on the 1 hour time frame. Candle between 1 to 2 p.m. or rather the candle that opened at 1 p.m. is here. And this time we can see that the candle is clearly bullish. So by this point in time, I have enough confidence to believe that this is a quality setup for me to execute. If I remove these drawings, you'll also notice the price action at this point. We were having a couple of wicks. So from this price point, look, we had a couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4, which is quite a good sign. Also, if you look at it from the perspective of the market starting to have less momentum, we did have these 2-3 candles with small momentum. We had this green candle which tried to break out of this price range. Now, it wasn't a very solid candle, so that could not have been, the best price action confirmation. But for me, just these wicks were more than enough to even increase my confidence. You look at the level where the wicks are forming. I just want you to come and draw a rectangle here. Then let's extend that rectangle to the left. You start to swipe backwards and you notice it's also a level of support. See, we had price forming some resistance here. We have another one there. If we move backwards some time, we see price also go to this level again and it started selling. So we already have 3 touches. Usually we just want a minimum of 3, but you can just find even more for confidence. We have another wick which came from that same level, more wicks from that level, another wick from that level. So long story short, that is a key level of support resistance, meaning we have more than enough confidence to believe the confirmation we've got at this point, with the previous one now being bullish, is very, very strong. So now we go back to the lower time frame, M15. Keep in mind the candle of execution is this. The range I had marked is at this point. And the candle at 2 p.m. is what is valid for execution, because we've now seen the previous one now was bullish. So just like that, I come and take my long position, place it there. My stop loss is about 15 pips and I'm targeting 45 on that trade. Clearly this setup was one of those that required strong psychology as well. You can see it played out for very long. And this is very long based on my strategy. Typical setups for me, they just run a couple of hours. But these are setups which I also got later, sometime 2 p.m. Even when I execute at 2 p.m, sometimes by 7 or 8 p.m, the setup usually has closed. Just 3, 4, 5 hours. But this setup ran all the way to the following morning. It actually closed overnight at about 5 a.m. the following morning. Took about 15 hours. It's not necessarily abnormal based on my strategy. It's just that I don't always get these setups that take, more than half a day that often. But for sure, based on my system, I do expect some setups can take long. So basically, this is how the setup looks like. Started very well, went very close to hitting my target. Whenever my trade is running 20 pips to my direction, which is more than half of my target, my break even is already set. So by this point in time, the trade had done about 35 pips. We were just 10 pips away from our target within just a couple of minutes from the execution. So I knew this is one of those setups that was going to hit TP within the next 2 or 3 15-minute candles. But instead, we saw the opposite happening. We see sellers coming in very strongly, came very close to my entry point, which was my break even. And at this point in time, again, you might have every reason to believe, this setup is about to fail. Let me just close with this small profit of about 5 pips instead of waiting for it to come back at break even. Luckily, I've already done such mistakes in my trading journey, and I'm just experienced enough to understand that I have no control in the markets. I'm experienced enough to understand that if I dare close this trade prematurely, then eventually something happens and it goes back to my direction like we see it did, then by the time it hits my target, I'll be full of regrets and I'll be telling myself, why did I close the trade here? Because based on my strategy, I don't have an approach that allows me to be closing my trades prematurely. It must either hit stop loss, take profit, break even. So at this point in time, I just let my trade run, started going back all the way up. Then it started going all the way up, played a lot. By this time, it's about 10 p.m. So I was almost going to sleep and I was just like, I'll leave the trade to run. The only thing I was scared about is the midnight spreads, because if the midnight spreads happen sometimes, you might find a very huge spread which usually closes your trade out, and that has happened to me before. And depending with the server time of your broker, the midnight spread will happen at different times. So long story short, this trade continued running. By this time I was asleep, woke up in the morning at about 5 a.m. and I found that by 5 a.m. this trade was just hitting my TP. But you can see at some point 3 a.m. into the night, it was again 2 or 3 pips away from my break even. Luckily, I was not awake to face this, psychological torture of prematurely imagining that this trade is about to close. By this time I was asleep, so I woke up in the morning and the setup had already hit my target. And just like that, I was able to secure close to $1,900 on my funded account by following my system, being disciplined, and just allowing the probabilities to play out. So having a prop firm or a broker that has nice spreads is something very important, because if the spreads are too big, there's a high chance this setup would have closed sometime over the night. And how do you find a prop firm with good spreads? Feel free to check out propfarmmatch.com. This is the one place where you can find different companies and do your thorough due diligence. In fact, for the spreads specifically, they do have a section which is here. Once you click here, you can compare spreads of different pairs. So whether you use CTrader, MT5, etc., we do have the platforms here, the prop firms and the different spreads for the most common instruments which are traded. So if you are trading UJ, I know a number of traders who trade gold and complain of spreads. So you can see so far right now, based on the available prop firm, some of the tightest spreads we are seeing right now from Blueberry Funded. We are seeing another tight spread from Funding Pips on gold, assuming that's what you trade. We also have 4 traders, instant funding. At the same time, I hope you can see we have prop firms like this one, which has a very wide spread on gold. So you see how important it is for you to understand the conditions of the prop firm you want to take before you purchase. And again, there is no other place right now that you can compare all these things at once other than prop firm match. If you trade US 30, for example, and you go for a prop firm like Secrets Funded, you can see so far it has probably the worst spread here. Okay, it actually follows this one, Phenotype Funding. So if you are trading US 30, ideally these are not props you'd want to go for. You would want to focus on the ones with the tightest spreads, of which if I scroll through, I'm seeing so far the tightest spread is 1.4, which is Funding Pips, and this prop firm here. The best thing about prop firm match is once you've done your comparison, you can just click on the firm and you get a brief overview of their rules at one place. So this is FundedNext. You can see the available platforms, payout methods. If you want to look at those important rules like, do they have a consistency rule? You can just know from this website that they don't have. Do they allow copy trading? It's already been answered here in detail. Is news trading allowed? So you can do a very quick comparison before you purchase your prop firm challenge. So otherwise, I hope you've learned something from this trade breakdown. And that's it for this video. I'll see you next time. Peace.